Now this part of the video has to come with a disclaimer. There was sometimes little to no change, sometimes rapid change, sometimes the political structure was not touched at all, and sometimes there were massive changes. So to say that the Seljuk political structure was XYZ is not an accurate representation of history. I will, however, try to give you a rough idea so you understand what the political structure roughly looked like. Initially, the Seljuks adopted the entire structure of the Ganzavits, including the administration, and didn't touch it much. The military, on the other hand, changed through and through to a Turkish military, or to put it in the words of the Seljuks, the people of the sword, aka Turks, were in charge of the military, whereas the people of the pen, aka Arabs and Persians, were in charge of the administration. Initially, Arabic was the predominant language used in this administration, but Persian replaced it over time, most likely because most people were speaking Persian on the Iranian plateau. Other than that, the administration was de facto a collective of independent and autonomous areas that were united under the banner of the Seljuks. Not one Seljuk Sultan either, but united under the main Seljuk dynasty. The family was spread out and controlled various areas of the Seljuk territory. This de facto resulted in actually two Seljuk kings ruling the nation, one being concerned over the east and the other over the west. De jure, you had the Rum Seljuks being on paper part of the Seljuk realm as well, but it was effectively a collective of Turkmen tribes spread across Anatolia with certain chieftains dominating the tribes over specific time periods. Literature about the Seljuks focuses on the western part of the Seljuk Empire, so we know even less about how the east was governed. There were some changes to this political structure as well. Tugril, for instance, was the first to unite the empire under one ruler. Alparslan, on the other hand, was the first to codify law and introduce the yargu, or yargı in Turkish, tribunals establishing the steppe laws. That being said, the Seljuks funded Islamic statehood institutions, struck coins, and brought generous systems of tax reliefs. This seems to have been a general trend, regardless of who was in charge. The Seljuks also established secure trading routes, and it is reported that prosperity increased under Tugril's rule. The Seljuks also established a system of merit. Anyone could become an Amir, aka governor, as an example. There were also Atabeys, a Seljuk term and introduction, which were Amirs appointed to a Seljuk prince to oversee his education. The Ottomans would have the same system later on, but they would use the term Lala instead of Atabey. Death and expropriation for fallen bureaucrats was also common. Dismissal was also possible, but didn't end the career. One could re-enter administration. Pedigree was also important for the administration, as in the sense of it was well seen. Mandarasa, whatever you want to call it in English, in particular were centers of education for bureaucrats. And there are theories that say that these particular institutions spread Seljuk state ideology. What I also find interesting is the fact that the Seljuks banned the intelligence agency very early on into their conquest. The reasons are unknown, but most likely it was because the intelligence agency used encrypted messages which were accessible to the bureaucracy. It seems like the Seljuks established some balance of power. There are two more interesting political structures that are rather interesting. First, the Caliphate was kept alive in Baghdad. De jure, the Seljuk dynasty were vassals of the Caliphate, but the Caliphate had no political authority over the Seljuks. This was done by the Seljuks in order to legitimize their rule, and from the perspective of the Caliphate, the Seljuks guaranteed their existence. This of course didn't go always well. There were a lot of power struggles which led to assassinations of the Caliphate by the Seljuks, which was blamed on the Ismailites, assassins, but there were also a lot of intermarriages between the two dynasties. It isn't far-fetched to say that the Seljuks Turkified the Abbasid dynasty and the Caliphate. The relation wasn't always all bad either. Sometimes they got along quite well, and sometimes it was about murdering each other. So it was literally a love-hate relationship, or a love-murder relationship to be more precise. Secondly, the throne could be inherited by anyone bearing the name of Seljuk. This could be the son, grandson, uncle or cousin of the dead Seljuk king that could become the next sultan. Seniority played a role as well, as in older people had more legitimacy and got more respect, but it wasn't a decisive requirement. You can imagine how this went, total chaos and lots of infighting between the respective members of the family. However, this was not frowned upon, but encouraged. Defeating your family member on the field resulted in the winner getting more legitimacy. The loser didn't even face any consequences and was even re-established as an administrator in other areas of the empire. Killing a family member was an extremely rare occurrence. The only time where it did happen was when a particular family member rebelled and went to war 3 separate times against the Sultan, after which he had enough and executed him. And even in this case, it came as a shock to the Seljuk court. Now some might say, this sounds like an extremely fragile system asking the Seljuks to crumble down. And yes, you would be right saying it. Eventually the entire structure crumbled down with the Seljuks having too much infightings, too many external enemies, and too many emirs seizing the opportunity to gain more power. Strangely enough, while the Seljuks were crumbling down, the patronage of art and science experienced an explosion of support around the 1150s and onwards. Which brings me to the next part of the video, the economy of the Seljuks. The impact of the Seljuks is like the other areas of Seljuk history not clear. There was a massive expansion of urbanism between the 9th and 10th century, indicating that economic prosperity started regardless of the Seljuks, but during the Seljuk reign, urbanism further increased. We have little facts, but one thing was for sure, the patronage of art and science resulted in a massive brain drain towards the Iranian plateau, thanks to the explosive court patronage under the Seljuks. This would indicate that the Seljuk realm massively increased in wealth with the Seljuk dynasty. Modern-day Azerbaijan in particular became a major center of Turkmen settlements due to its good pastureland and saw economic prosperity as a result of it. Other areas that suffered under the initial military conquest of the Seljuks recovered rapidly and gained massive significance. Nishapur, as an example, became more prosperous under the Seljuks than ever before because it became a corridor to the east caravans could not avoid coming through. Nishapur was also not the only example. Numerous cities across the Seljuk realm experienced massive expansion. All of this was likely due to the focused trade economy the Seljuks established, predominantly the caravan trade. Under the Seljuks, the Silk Road gained massive influence and importance. Trade from India and China all the way to the Middle East increased. This prosperity did not only benefit Muslims but also Jews and Christians, which were quite positive of the Seljuk reign. At this point, I would be done with the video, but there is one last topic I would like to discuss here. Were the Seljuks Turkish or Persian or Arabic or Islamic? To answer this question, we first have to look what was different from the previous Islamic rule that was conducted prior to the Seljuks. We have to look at the Seljuk legacy. Namely, the Seljuks were the first to introduce Atabeys. These Atabeys legitimized themselves as the heirs of the Seljuks, even long after the Seljuks disappeared. Basically up until the Mongol rule, under which Turks tribalized themselves in the sense of seeing themselves as heirs of the Seljuks. It's likely that the Ottomans had a huge immigration of Ghazi warriors because of the Seljuk prestige. The Tura was introduced by the Seljuks. This is a tradition that did not exist prior. Step custom was upheld. Money was for instance demanded from the Abbasid Caliph for marrying a Seljuk princess because, quote, the custom of the Turks in arranging marriages. Alparslan and Sanjay had Turkish-style mustaches, meaning long mustaches that had to be tied back when shooting an arrow. Masud would also wear Turkmen ceremonial donings, another Seljuk sultan. Under Seljuk rule, fortifications became a part of city design, meaning walls were regularly built around cities, which is in line with steppe culture, building tents wall-like, quote-unquote wall-like. Certain traditions lost values and meaning. Zoroastrian traditions in particular were neglected under the Seljuks. Turkish songs were sang during weddings. A Turkish dictionary was made, even Lugal al-Turk composed in Baghdad, because Turkish was court language, indicating a wider spoken Turkish society than initially assumed. Turkish poetry was also written by Seljuk sultans, despite knowing Persian, which was for example done by Malik Shah. Bows and arrows became symbols of sovereignty, which is in line with steppe culture. It was used in Tura, official letters, and on coins. Rebellions against specific Seljuk sultans were not done with removing the Seljuks in mind, but with replacing the ruler with another Seljuk ruler. There were two revolts in the 11th century attempting to put a non-Seljuk on the throne, and it immediately failed due to lack of support. The Seljuk court was an open space and was outside the city, contrary to Persian rule. Seljuk sultans would move around and put their court outside of the local city to attend their duties. New traditions were introduced into the court, as an example the Nawaba, which was the playing of drums or a musical band to signify rank. This also included Turkish horns. So to answer the question, the administration was most definitely not Turkish. It was first Arabic and then Persian. However, the Seljuk dynasty itself was definitely Turkish. They identified themselves as Turks and were perceived as Turks by everyone around them. The culture, on the other hand, was a mix of Islamic, Persian, and Turkish traditions, whereas the military was exclusively Turkish. Some say that the Seljuks were a heavily Persianized empire. I would say that the Seljuks were Turkish, adopting a predominantly Persian state that was then heavily Turkified. There are a few more points I would like to briefly mention, which I didn't see fitting in other parts of the video. The Seljuk dynasty also ruled today's Oman. This was done by different family members, but of the Seljuk dynasty. During Mongol rule, the Seljuks were idealized, similar to the way Roman files are idealizing the Roman Empire today. Due to infighting, there was very little to no reaction to the First Crusade by the Seljuks. The Ayyubids and the Safavids relied so much on Turks that they were perceived as Turkish empires from this fact alone. Saladin's father, Najim al-Din Ayyub, was even a Seljuk military governor, and there is a legitimate theory that the Ayyubid state was run the same way as the Seljuk one, meaning the Ayyubids were basically a successor state of the Seljuks adopting the exact same system. Story time. It was during the First Crusade. The Muslims were in an uproar. A mix of feeling overcame the people. Fear, anger, but also of worry. The Christian armies were coming. They were coming to slaughter. Ibn al-Athir was among the crowd and eager to see the emissary that arrived in Baghdad. The emissary spoke to the people directly, shouting, "Do not fear the Crusaders. You're strong enough. You're mighty warriors. Send your armies to victory. Send your armies to glory. Send the Crusaders back to where they came from." Ibn al-Athir hastened to the Seljuk Sultan. Allowed to speak, he said, "Do you not fear God, given that the Byzantine king is a better protector of Islam than you are, so that he has sent you to wage jihad against them?" This actually happened. Not in this way, and Ibn al-Athir didn't speak to the Sultan directly, but the Romans did in fact encourage the Seljuk subjects to complain to the Seljuk Sultan in order to start a jihad against the First Crusade. The Romans begged for a jihad against the First Crusade.